Hello, and welcome to the podcast. This is Get in the Driver's Seat. We're telling stories about leadership moments in small to mid-sized professional practices. I'm your host, Sandra Beckor, Practice Management Coach at Beckor Management. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Jeri Quinn. Jeri, I love this title from your LinkedIn profile. An executive coach, business builder, listener, practical ROI generator, leadership facilitator, super connector. Leaders engage me to attract and empower staff, build efficiencies, and find recommended vendors. Jeri Quinn founded Driving Improved Results in 2006. So Jeri, we almost have the same anniversary, off by a year.
Mm-hmm.
And she published this lovely book, Customer Loyalty Playbook, in my hands for those on YouTube. It's chock full of practical advice and examples that make it come to life. Thank you for your generosity in this book, Jeri.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to be here. It's nice to be able to talk with you and address your audience and be part of your long list of excellent experts.
Yeah, thanks. I've been doing this podcast for about a year and a half, and I just love it. Really enjoy the interviews. So before we get into it, I'd like to give a shout out to Mark Halpert, who connected us through his Inward Facing podcast. Very cool concept, right? And if you want to
Mm-hmm.
know more, you'll have to ask him and his collaborator, Charlie Burney, for more insights about that. So today, our theme is shifting culture intentionally to support your business goals. So for many small to mid-sized professional services firms, this is typically not an area that is given a lot of attention. But the thing is, whether you do or you don't plan around it, you have a culture. The question is, does your default culture help you or hinder you? And if it's not helping you, what can you do about it? That's what we're going to explore today. So maybe we should start right at the beginning because this is such an abstract concept. Jeri, can you tell us how you would define culture?
Sure. The culture is a summation of everything that goes on in your business between the people, and it is enhanced by policies. It's enhanced by the workflow, but it is determined by the leaders. So if you want to use an analogy, if a fish stinks, it stinks from the head, right? We've all heard that expression. And you use the term default culture. Well, there is a default culture and a defined culture. And if you have a default culture and you're not paying attention to actually growing or expanding or shifting your culture into something that's going to be more beneficial to everyone, I'll put it that way initially until we further define that, then you're going to wind up with the default culture, which means maybe prior owners had an impact there, or people who used to work for you who are, the rotten apple who are souring the whole apple bunch. They still have influence. And so if you can design a culture based on what you want it to be, then you can use great leadership to keep people engaged, to have great productivity, to welcome more and more clients and develop client loyalty at a much greater extent. I mean, a lot of things become much more easy when you have a great culture.
Yeah, and I think just to keep it simple for those, listeners who don't really know a lot about what firm culture is about, to me, it's the sum of your beliefs and your values, the
Mm-hmm.
behaviors that automatically happen at the firm, just to
Yep.
make this less abstract of a concept. And, what you're talking about, if we played with a theoretical example, it could be, oh, well, we never are allowed to do this kind of thing, so I won't ask. I mean, that could be an example of how culture plays out because
Mm-hmm.
people believe that it won't be approved if I ask for permission to do such a thing, so I won't even bother.
Yeah.
So that's an example of actually culture playing out. Okay, so All right, so let me dig in. So I have a few questions for you. Typically, my business focuses on small to mid-sized professional service firms. And
Right.
I've watched them grow, right? So that, I watch them start really small and then they grow and it's exciting. But at the same time, while that happens, if the owners don't keep their eye on culture, it evolves on its own, sometimes in a good way, really dynamic and exciting and unstoppable, and sometimes not as good, right?
Yep.
If and so for firms who have never done this kind of work, like intentionally drive their culture, it may be difficult for them to understand how, but even more difficult to understand why. Why do we do this? So let's unpack that a little bit. And just can you shed some light on how can the process of culture change help firms to overcome some of the concerns that professional service firms are running into these days, like very typical problems like quiet quitting, DEI that doesn't feel authentic, and challenges built into managing a hybrid or a remote workforce, disengagement, lack of leadership. Did you want to shed some light on that, Jerry?
Yeah. So that's kind of a zillion questions packed into one right there.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
um, yeah. So the most engaging kind of culture stems from having a caring environment. When you, as the leader, care about the individual employees, and you don't have to be totally into their personal lives to care about them, but you should know something about them personally, even if it's just their favorite music or their favorite sports team, and whether or not they have a partner and any kids. I mean that, and maybe if they have a dog, those kind of things generally come up when people are sharing around the water cooler, so to speak. And so you don't have to get into something any deeper than that. But when you as a leader say, yeah, I saw the Phillies won last night, I was gung ho about that. Are you a Phillies fan too? It just helps to build a bond. And that's important to have some bonds like that are not just, well, this work got done, but this work didn't get done, and you made a mistake here or you did a good job there. You know, something more personal is important. And then I think too, values. So if you're the kind of leader who it's not just about the functional work, it's about setting what is the vision and the values of my firm? What are we really aiming for? What's the world going to look like if we do a good job? And then values. What do we value here? Yeah, we all value hard work. We all value accuracy. And, for especially accountants and lawyers, we're valuing attention to detail. But do we value everybody learns? Do we value that everybody has some fun at work? Do we value that people personal values align with the company's values and they see a sense of their purpose, their career development, whatever, inside the firm? I mean, if those are the kind of values that the company considers important, then the employee themselves will find that there's more respect, more dignity. They feel more valued. They feel their contributions are more valued. Um, and a lot of times there's value and appreciation. So if you're the kind of leader who shows appreciation, who acknowledges a job well done, who thanks people for contributing to the firm, who shows gratitude when a big project is complete and everybody's contributed and we're all having a pat on the back for everybody because we all worked hard to submit this big bid in together. I mean, that's important. I remember something out of my own experience. I had an IT firm, and we were asked to submit this $1 million bid, and I was bigger, of course, than we were because it was a number of years ago, and $1 million was a big deal at that point. And so, you know, I acted as project leader because it was my company, but somebody else did all the processing in Microsoft Word because they gave it to us in some strange format, and we had to really figure it out so that we could submit it. And somebody else did the collection of this data, and somebody else did the collection of this data, and somebody else did this research, and then somebody else called to make sure that, if we drove down right now, they'd accept the bid. And it was a lot of work that took several weeks, and we all got it done. It was such a big relief for everybody, and a big that when it got submitted, and a big relief when we all could give each other a hug and say, "Oh, we did this together." It was wonderful. And then later on, a team member of mine went and defended the bid because we had to do a verbal presentation, and um, we knew it so well because we had worked on it together that we were pretty much finishing each other's sentences. And it was a wonderful experience to do this with one of my colleagues and answer their every question. And I'm sure we looked at like a team that was really solid, and we did get that bid. So those kinds of things turn out in terms of um, client loyalty and landing new prospects and having everybody show up and even stay a little late because they want to get things done for the sake of the team, and supporting each other and doing something outside their own description in order to make everything work. I mean, those are the kinds of stories that I remember to this day, and it happened many years ago.
Oh, it stayed with you. That's beautiful. Yeah, and they probably remember too.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the background you're sharing and the stories, they really sort of tie the they really tie culture to some of these issues that firms are
Yeah,
running into. That the issue of disengagement and difficulty managing a remote or hybrid workforce. Because
yeah,
if you really do believe that it's important to recognize people, to make an effort to show them you care, to help teams to work well together as teams, to celebrate your victories, all of that actually makes a big difference in
yeah.
terms of helping people feel engaged.
People want to come to work when they know they're going to be celebrated and make a contribution that's worthwhile. Um, and we've all heard people who say, "Oh, the alarm clock rang and I got to drag my feet to get out of bed and to get myself to work, and I'm going to extend my coffee break because I just don't like being here." And this quiet quitting, right?
Yeah.
When people quit and stay, it's worse than quit and go. Um, and so if you want people to be there because they want to be there, then there's a number of things you have to provide for them. Certainly, that caring and that involvement in the team and its energy, and being appreciated for worthwhile contributions that you as an employee are making. But then everybody wants a career path. If I'm stuck in a dead end job, what am I going to do? I'm going to look for another company where the job isn't a dead end job. Even if I have to make a lateral move, or even if I have to take a cut in pay, at least I have the future, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so people want that. And then people want good leadership, and they want to feel like they're being recognized. Part of that's appreciation, but the good leadership means that the leadership sets the expectation that everybody will contribute, that everybody is worthwhile. So it's not just you to your manager or you to the ultimate leader of the company, however many steps that is. It's you and all your peers. You and all your peers support each other because you're within this space created by leadership of mutual support and mutual pride and mutual respect and mutual dignity. And yeah, that ties into DEI, because if you've got your token person of color, and you've got a few token types of policies, that's different than no microaggressions. That's different than everybody is really respectful, even when push comes to shove, because we all know that sometimes when things get really harried and you're under a deadline, that some of the um, more superficial things fly away, and you're left with what the base values are. And if the base values are one of um, disrespect, then all the other kinds of things, don't matter, because, it only takes one disrespectful statement, and it's hard to earn that trust back. And so what the leaders are doing is creating an atmosphere of trust. They're saying, in this space, this place that I'm holding for all the employees of the company, we trust each other, we respect each other, we depend on each other, we work and play together, and we have this mutual admiration society because we're all trusting each other to do our jobs and to set things up for the next aspect of doing that job. And it's just really important to have leadership care about everyone and set up the trust with everyone and to respect everybody's values.
Mhm. It's interesting because somebody listening to this who doesn't really understand how to work on culture might say, well, you either respect them or you don't. I don't understand what that has to do with cultural development work. Could you tie those two a little bit more together?
Yeah. So nobody ever stays the same, right? We all evolve. If we didn't evolve, the world would probably be a pretty crazy place. Now, do we all evolve at the same rate or in the same directions? No. Um, as is perfectly exhibited by our divisive society right now. Um, but we all have a choice to stay the same or to take actions toward the newest iteration of ourselves, which is our newest evolution. And of course, in my background, I have door one and door two. And so, just like in many movies, you have the option of door one or door two, or the blue pill or the red pill, or any of those kinds of analogies. Um, door one might be do nothing, and door two is take the next step. And so any kind of personal development is all about, and professional development is all about, am I going to engage in cultural design or just stick with the status quo and accept the cultural default to use what far? Or for a person, an employee might be, am I going to take this training course to better myself and be eligible for another promotion, even though I don't think I will master it. It's going to be a leap in the dark. Or do I want to just stay the same and not take any chances? And people make different choices. I mean, somebody close to retirement in a very civil service type of position might say, well, I'm just going to wait out the next 2 years till I retire and not do anything additional. Whereas somebody who's young and eager might say, yeah, I'm up for every single bit of training I can get because I want to advance my career. And there's a lot of people in the middle. So you have to respect the choices that people make. But to say you're not given a choice is never right because you're always given a choice.
Hmm.
So we talked about DEI, we talked about quiet quitting. And what was the other scenario you mentioned?
Managing a hybrid remote workforce.
Yes. So this is a choice that every leadership group had to make coming back from the pandemic. Are
Hmm.
they going to allow employees to continue to work from home? Are they going to require that everybody come in? Are they going to allow people to do some of each? And it really, of course, depends on the work environment. Some people say that requiring everybody to come in is good because then the culture can develop and everybody can have a more cohesiveness and the team can really be a team. And other people say, well, when everybody worked at home, they got more done and they didn't have to um, uh, use a lot of time to commute and they could manage their families better and all those kind of things. And so there's arguments in either direction. And I think the leadership teams that were have been um, the most successful have really looked at each aspect of the kind of work that they do, plus the employees that they have, and they made hard choices. Um, Sometimes those choices were left up to managers of individual departments. Sometimes they were left to the leader of the whole company. But I think the ones that were unsuccessful are the ones that said, you must come in, you must do what I say, because they didn't allow for individual differences and they didn't allow for um, individual circumstances. So there are some people with who are commuting big distances, or some people who didn't want to do those commutes and were maybe willing to do it 1 or 2 days a week, but weren't willing to do it all week. And then there's some people who um, had uh, they were either very compromised health-wise themselves or somebody in their close environment, and they didn't want to bring a lot of germs in from either commuting or being in an open office. And some people were actually hired during the pandemic for a remote job and then required to come in 2 days a week. And they didn't like that at all. So, and then the environment that they had in the office was not as conducive to getting their work done and doing it productively as the setup they had at home, which was already set up to be really productive in the remote space. So this is where listening comes in, because if you're going to have a good culture, you're going to listen. You're going to listen to your managers. You're going to listen to individual employees, and you're going to listen to everyone who has a story to tell. And of course, some people will try to take advantage of that. But if you have a culture where people feel really listened to, then they don't have to take advantage of it because they know they'll be treated fairly. And by listening, there are a couple of ways to listen. You can listen to respond, which is not really listening at all because you're planning what you're going to say, you're not really hearing what the other person says. And then there's listening to repeat, which is I'm going to summarize what you say, so I hear it, but I'm just going to feed it right back to you. And then there's listening to connect. What's going on underneath those words, and where's the energy in your voice, and where do you speed up and slow down, and what is it that you're not saying? And that whole connection piece is all about really listening with your heart and your soul and mind. And I don't want to get any touchy-feely right here, but it's a deeper form of listening to the whole person, not just to the words. And that's a really important part of having empathy. It's a really important part of emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence, according to all the articles in the Harvard Business Review, is the biggest part of leadership. Those who are more emotionally intelligent are more set up to be better leaders. And so a leader who can grow their emotional intelligence is growing their own leadership and growing the possibility of leading a better culture, is more capable of realizing in themselves, oh, I should delegate that. I don't have to control it. So lots of small business owners, professional service firms especially, who are all into control. My name's on this. I'm going to risk my reputation on this. I've got to control it. And yet they can't really scale what they're doing if they have to control every little bit of it. They have to delegate. And of course, with delegation goes training. They have to train people well so that they feel they can delegate to them. And so with a great deal of emotional intelligence, they can say, am I controlling this because I want to control it, because I think it's necessary to control it, because there's some realistic reasons to do that, or just because I need to control? And, when people get into that kind of self-assessment, that shows a high degree of self-awareness, which then branches out into other awareness, which then is attributed to both individuals and groups. And understand that's what the root of empathy is, right? So I'm rambling, but I think I'm answering your questions. I really love this subject. I get all fired up about it because I've seen so much success. Companies like Zappos get bought out by Amazon because they have wonderful cultures. Amazon didn't need to buy Zappos just to sell shoes. Amazon wanted to buy Zappos because of their culture, and they wanted to bring that culture and learn some things from it and take it within other parts of Amazon.
Hmm.
And I've seen companies that have immediately who have taken the time to grow a customer service staff, giving them training, giving them tools, and not making them the bottom rung of the organization, but maybe, having them be like the feedback loop of the organization. And it totally takes the company to the next level in terms of sales and um, revenue. So, as well as profitability. And I've asked a lot of CFOs if somebody has a good culture, if, for instance, that shows up in how much they're attracting better staff and retaining existing staff, where do you see that in the financials? Because this is the ROI, right? You want to see it in the financials, you want to see it somewhere on the bottom line. And I've been told by CFOs that when the culture is good, when staff stays, when there's not a lot of turnover in staff, when you're attracting A-level staff because the culture is good, it shows up in the cost of goods sold. It costs less to get jobs done. And therefore, there's a higher gross margin and bigger bottom line overall. Um, and people who um, look at the cost of training and coaching often see there's like a 700% ROI on those costs. And that shows up, even though the training line of the budget is training and coaching line of the budget is higher. So many other things are 700% higher that it's very worthwhile doing.
Hmm. That was a lovely description, and your passion does come through, Jerry. I can see how you really care. And I just wanted to say the ideas that you were talking about with respect to leaders who show caring and who show respect, really at the end of the day, getting that engagement that they're looking for, it happens naturally. And you know, just to make this a little bit more concrete to some of the listeners who aren't used to this kind of conversation, I just want to talk about a few ideas for systems because there are ways to make these things happen. Rightly, exactly like you're talking, Jerry, about your choices to make professional development for yourself as a leader or as the individuals in the company or the company as a whole to grow. You always have a choice about
Mhm.
taking that step forward. And just sort of some examples that I'll just throw out there. One is learning a method for giving recognition. So it's
Mhm.
not just a matter of, oh yeah, I said thank you to them. That's my job, right? I did it. Well, that's not what we mean when we say recognition. And so you can learn a whole system to recognize somebody in a way that really is more powerful and to really deeply understand as a manager that people aren't all motivated by the same thing. So they're not just motivated by money. And some people rightly are motivated by money, and that's fine. Talk to them about money. But for other people who are motivated by something else, your job is to understand what that is and to give them the feedback and the recognition in a way that lands for them
Yeah.
powerfully. And that
So,
requires training and systems.
and it involves listening too. So,
Mm.
some examples, for instance, um, I got to know one of our employees because I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had, 6 different businesses. So, I don't encourage anybody to do anything that I might have not have tried myself in many cases. So, um, they were a baseball fan, and so uh, the biggest thing that we gave that person is a couple of tickets to a baseball game because much that we knew them that well, and also something they could take a spouse or partner to or a friend, and it was and it was a thank you for doing a good job, right? Another thing that was really important, there was a guy who actually was our CFO, and he did a lot of extra work, and he had to get some things straightened out, and he put in a lot of hours. And what we did was we didn't send a thank you note to him. We sent a thank you note to his wife for thanking her for letting her husband have those hours for the company instead of spending them with their family. And so, sometimes it doesn't have to be very costly. Sometimes it is just the thought that you put into it because of the what you read and what you listen to about the other person. If he's a family man and you give his wife the thank you note, how many points do you think that scores, right? So that just comes from listening and being empathetic and getting to know the person well. There are many different ways to thank people.
Yeah, and I'll share a little formula that I use, which is to, instead of saying thank you, to wrap the thank you around the thing that that person is proud of.
Hmm.
So if a person, on your team really stayed up late last night to finish a piece of work that was overdue for a client, and you say thank you to them, you have choices about how to do that. You could say thank you for helping us to meet our deadline, or you could remember, what does this person care about? What motivates them? And if this person is really about being a team person, you could say, well, we noticed how you really just led the team. You
Hmm.
helped us for the past 3 days to make sure everybody knew their role. And in the end, you pulled it all together. You are truly a team player. That person, you made their day. That,
Maybe they're weak.
right. That won't work so much with the person who is, driven by accuracy. For that person, you need to say, wow, there was nothing wrong with that project. I mean, I checked it 3 times and I couldn't even find any errors. So,
Hmm.
tailoring the recognition to what motivates the person or what they're most proud of really
Hmm.
makes the recognition land in a way that's so much more powerful. Just an example of learning how to do something that makes your culture go further on purpose.
Yeah. And the other thing too is to recognize whether that person's really an extrovert or an introvert, because an extrovert will love to be praised in front of other people.
Yes.
And some introverts, and a lot of people are mixed, right? So you have to really listen and learn. Extreme introvert would rather have that praise in private. And so knowing your employee well enough to um, give that praise in a way that's going to be very appreciated is important. An introvert might be embarrassed by that kind of a praise in front of a whole bunch of other people. So you have to be careful of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, some people give praise very seldom. But if you really want a good manager, you really should give somebody, it doesn't have to be the same person all the time, of course, but somebody praise every day. It should be a habit. And if people are not in that habit, then they probably need an accountability partner to develop that habit. I mean, it takes, some people say 30 days, some people say 60 or 90 days to develop a habit. But if it's not your habit, shouldn't just, fold your arms and say, that's not my personality. I don't give praise, because that's not going to win friends and influence people, to use a phrase, right? Um, it's something that's necessary for leadership. It's part of the job description if you're going to do a good job. And so if you want to develop in that way, this is where door one and door two come into play. Then you do what it takes to develop that way, which means find an accountability partner. If you're a manager, find another manager or find somebody outside. Even your partner in life might be the person who says at dinner time, "Did you remember to thank somebody today?" Um, but you want to be held accountable, so even if it's by text, that you are developing this habit. And that's for any habit, whether it's showing appreciation or remembering to keep your voice level so you don't shout at people, um, or you know, learning one new thing about somebody on your team each day. That kind of a habit is um, you want to develop these kind of things because you want to grow and evolve into a better manager all the time.
Mhm. So, Jerry, you raised the idea of leadership before, and I think that's such a nice tie-in to this topic about culture, because leadership and culture are intertwined.
Yeah.
Both, however, are often misunderstood, especially with organizations who haven't done this kind of work before. And so, what I've noticed is that sometimes you have people at the firm who have great ideas and who are energized to try to do something, but they don't actually try because they don't think it's their role. Like if you look at the org chart, it's not really their responsibility, and they don't realize the power that they have. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how individuals who are not necessarily the owners or the partners at a firm can influence the culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's different ways around that. I know in the business that um, we had a suggestion box. Anybody could put an idea in the suggestion box. If you're a good leader and you feel that people are holding back, you could, make a big deal of the suggestion box. And that's a way to get around maybe a manager who's holding down your potential, or doesn't want to recognize your good ideas. I mean, I was in an organization, which wasn't my own organization for a while, and I had a manager, and a lot of my ideas were not really listened to. Then I left, and then they instituted all of them, right? So, and it wasn't just because I left; it's just because their thinking then evolved to now they were ready, right?
You planted the seed. You planted the
Yeah,
seed for
yeah.
change.
And so I think it's important to acknowledge people. And then there are managers who will take credit for their subordinates' work, which is really devastating. And hopefully, if you're a leader, you don't allow that, because that's really not showing respect or dignity or appreciation in the right place. But there are, mid-level managers who will take credit for the work of the person who's their direct report. And you're caught in the middle, between a rock and a hard place, because don't want to undermine your own manager, and but then you do want to get acknowledged for what was your idea and what actually worked. And so, it depends. I mean, as you get to know your manager, will they feel guilt? Is there a way that you can say something that actually makes them feel like, well, they should come clean? Or, um, is there a way that you can bring them along so they start to think of those things on their own? Um, and will it get recognized eventually that you're kind of leading from below? Um, so there are ways around that, but you as the leader can have an open door policy. You can have suggestion boxes. You can, if you really feel you're being abused, that's what HR is for. If it happens over and over again repeatedly, and you wind up with the short end of the stick, then HR is there for you to file a complaint if you really feel you want to do that. But then you have to look at, is that going to be counterproductive in the culture where you're at? Um, and if it happens a lot, maybe that's the reason you want to leave. Sometimes the people with the best ideas leave because they feel stifled.
Yeah, and so that's one end of it, and I've actually lived those experiences, and it really is very, like you put it, devastating. And that's what we would, I guess we would call toxic culture.
Exactly.
And but
And then women too, very often women get talked over, and sometimes their
yes,
ideas get taken, and sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself, man or woman, and say, I appreciate you taking my idea and bringing it out to the management team, and getting so much support for it. Thank you so much. Now, it would be lovely if you identified it as my idea. And did you want to put a twist on it, so that you could say, well, this idea originated with Jeri, but I put this twist on it so to make it a little bit more feasible for our team? You know, I'm happy to share the responsibility and the credit for it. You know, it depends on, of course, the relationship you have with your manager, whether you can be that forthright. But sometimes you really have to stick up for yourself.
That was a really great example of how to take ownership of this in a way that is not combative and, allows for something to improve. That was
Hmm.
well done, Jerry. I just wanted to say I also see on the flip side that sometimes it looks like the organization and the owners would actually be open, but the people who have ideas are hesitant. And they may be hesitant because they're just they're just shy, or they're introverted, or they're not used to speaking up, or they don't actually have a formal venue. Like maybe there isn't a suggestion box, maybe they never have meetings with the decision makers, but they underestimate that there is an opportunity for them to step up. And so can you talk a little bit about how you would see somebody like that influencing culture?
Yeah. So part of the culture is that part of a good design, well-designed culture is that it invites people who are a little shy to step out of their comfort zone, and feel welcome. Um, and there's all kinds of barriers to that. Like, I have a good idea, but it's not well developed. I couldn't present that because I don't know enough details about it yet.
Mhm.
Um, and what happens often is that, in a small company, especially, or a small department, you can have a brainstorming session where the leader has, a big whiteboard or poster board, and they say, we want to solve the problem. And they write the name of the problem up at the top. And they say, fire out ideas, popcorn, pop, pop. What are some ideas to solve this problem? And they don't have to be realistic. We'll decide how realistic they are after we've got a whole page of ideas. What are the ideas? And the whole idea is to get people to overshoot what might be feasible and to say a lot of things that aren't feasible, because then it just spurs ideas in other people of some things that might actually be feasible. So if you get, 20 or 30 ideas up on the board from a team of, 7 people who are talking about this, then the next thing you do is you go through those 20 or 30 ideas and you say, well, that's not feasible and that's pretty silly, but it got us all to think more, and this one won't work and this won't work. Okay, we got 5 ideas out of the 30 that were up on the board. Now let's talk about these 5, about, how feasible, long-term, short-term, finances, um, who's going to implement them, how close to our goal do you think it would get? All these other kinds of reality-based discussions. But having the brainstorming session where everybody's just popping out ideas kind of creates an environment that everybody's ideas are welcome, no matter how silly, how unfeasible, um, and no matter comes up with them. So a lot of times in a team, you've got 7 or 8 people, but 2 people are the people who speak up the most often, right?
Yes.
And then the others are the worker bees. They get it done. Maybe they have an idea. Maybe they funnel it through somebody else, or maybe they just hold on to it till the very last minute when nobody else has an idea, and then might say, I think I have an idea too.
Mhm.
And this is where practice makes perfect. So if that person speaks up once, then the leader can say the next time they're doing solving a problem, you came up with a good idea last time. Tell us what's on your mind now. And that creates the invitation, so that and the self-esteem and the pride to be able to speak up again. But that's that leader giving opportunity to everybody, even the most shy and the most intimidated, or the person less likely. Like sometimes there's a new person on the team who doesn't have any experience of what's gone on before, and they are reticent to speak up because they don't have a history of what's been said earlier or tried earlier. And I think it's up to the leader to say, you know what? We've heard from a lot of people, but I want to hear from the new people on the team because they come in with the most objectivity. They come in with, not, without understanding if, ands, or buts. They just come in with ideas that could have worked anywhere. So what are some of And so that personal invitation will help reticent people to open up.
Hmm. That's wonderful. So the leaders can have more of an open mind about how to
Mm.
engage those quieter, more introverted, shy people who may
Mm-hmm.
actually have a lot to contribute. And then from the perspective of the actual individual, if the leaders don't create that invitation, I still think that the actual individual can create that path for themselves.
Oh, they can if they're motivated to. And
Yes.
so there's the motivation. Are they motivated by, I want to develop my career, so I got to speak up once in a while,
Mhm.
or else I won't be considered enough of a leader to be eligible for the next training? Um, or do they get support at home? Are you speaking up at work? I know lots of people get support at home for asking for more money, you know, salary negotiations. A lot of times, and I've been in some of those discussions with some of my kids, my adult kids who, and their spouses who feel that they deserve more money and they're hesitant to do it. They know they want to, and they talk it to death with me. And then the next day they go in and they talk about it to their boss because they practiced, right?
Yeah,
At home.
the
And
role play is helpful.
I think it's part of the culture too, because if the culture welcomes self-assertion and trains people for self-assertion, I mean, many different cultures will have even a women's group where the women have speakers or they talk or they do book club or whatever, and they empower each other to be more assertive. And that often happens that the women are the most reticent, right? The guys are ready to speak up and tell you everything on their mind. Um, and often the women are not. And I don't want to generalize there because sometimes that's the reverse is true. Um, but having that kind of training sponsored by the company, that everybody has a voice and everybody is empowered to use their voice, I think that is um, really part of designing the culture is to make that empowerment type of training available to anybody and everyone. Um, and even people who will speak up need to take that training because part of the training is how to shut your mouth and let other people speak, right?
Yes.
And how to listen for an empowered person and how to accept everybody's contribution.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of people who just talk over other people and they don't realize how disempowering that is.
Yeah, and speak up when you're adding value, as opposed to just speaking up because you're used to speaking up.
Yeah. And
So
there
I,
are leaders who need to learn how to lead meetings, right? So some
mm,
leaders think that the meeting is there for them to talk the whole time. And
right.
the best use of a meeting is often to just ask questions and get everybody else's opinion and thoughts and reports from the field, because that's what's realistically going to make the biggest difference. And so I, as an executive coach, sometimes go into a meeting with a leader and I listen and I measure the time the leader speaks versus other people in the team, or I look at the dynamics around the table and I say, this person spoke once, but they were so powerful when they spoke that this is your secondary leader in the room who captures everybody's attention when they speak, um, but everybody listens to them. And everybody, sometimes leaders are so full of their own leadership, they don't pick up the dynamics of what's happening around the conference room table.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen that happen. I've seen it where the leader invites the person in the room who doesn't necessarily have the title to be, proposing recommendations or whatever, but actually give them respect and give them time to speak, and it shifts everything in the room.
Yeah.
Shifts the way you perceive that individual, and everybody adopts that respect. It's
Hmm.
very interesting to see that change so quickly.
Yeah. And I've seen leaders who will call the meeting to order and then say, okay, here's the agenda that we put together before the meeting. I'm going to let Pete over here be the facilitator of this meeting. or and he or she shifts it around so that everybody has a turn at different times. If this is like a weekly or a monthly staff meeting, they give other people the chance to actually facilitate the meeting. And it's very powerful when a leader does that. The leader doesn't have to control everything.
Wonderful. So I had one more question.
Yeah.
You actually alluded to this already, Jerry, so we'll see if you have something else you want to add. Returning to that interesting phrase in your LinkedIn title, practical ROI generator. I love that. So, talking about that in the context of culture, what is the impact of investing in culture change? Because it takes time, it takes money. What is the
Hmm.
impact of that on revenue and other markers of a healthy company? And you did allude to it before. Is there anything that you want to say beyond that?
Well, I think everyone should look at um, different things they want to implement in terms of what is the ROI going to be? What's the tangible ROI, as in money, or productivity measurement of some kind, or maybe customer loyalty, referrals, maybe something very measurable. And then what's the intangible benefit?
Mm.
Increased pride, increased confidence, increased self-esteem, and increased engagement in the culture, those kinds of things. Attraction of better staff. So um, that should really be the question whenever you want to engage in something is what's the ROI, both in tangible terms and intangible terms. So whenever you're thinking about personal and professional development for employees as well as the leaders of the company, the CEO or the practice manager, um, what would yield great ROI? So anything that's going to um, engage employees in really wanting to stay is good because there's a lot of costs in terms of turnover. And, um, from recruiting to hiring to onboarding to management time to training that person to all the peers that are taking over the work while the hiring process is taking place and the burnout that involves. Um, so all those kinds of things is usually 2 or 3 times that person's salary. And so even though it might not hit the financials in a recognizable way, it does really impact the financials. And so, and then there's lost opportunity costs. Sometimes that doesn't hit the financials, but it's a real cost, If you've got a new employee trying to win over an existing customer, but the existing customer is going to go with the person who just left, then that's lost opportunity cost because if you had retained that client because you retained the staff, you would have been that farther ahead, depending on the value of the size of the client. And so all these things have ROI, even if they don't hit the financials in the same way as productivity. I said hit the cost of goods sold line item on the financials. Um, and then sometimes you can measure productivity in terms of utilization rates and other kinds of things. But it's important to really look at the morale of the company too. And that's an intangible benefit. Does everybody look forward to coming to work? Are they excited to be there? Do they enjoy working with their peers? Um, do they enjoy stopping in at the CEO's office to share a moment or something they want to share an idea or a complaint with, right? They feel that they want to engage and they want to, that if they talk, that they'll be listened to. That's the real thing, right? That they can have an impact. And so there's real ROI in all aspects of that. And certainly A players want to work with other A players. So if you're growing an organization and the culture is good and you've got some A players and you've developed them to A players because you've got given them career paths, then they're going to say to other people they know in the industry, I really like my job. I like the company I work for. And then the people who are A players in companies where they feel the culture is toxic are going to leave and come to your company because they know they want to work with other A players because that's where the career enhancement is, right? And the interesting work is, and where the good clients are going to come to. And so, there's lots of things you can measure and then lots of things you can't measure. But the real is ROI. And it turns out in terms of long-term scaling and uh, your ability to then maybe buy other practices because your practice has got some loyalty and some good revenues coming to it. So it enables the practice to grow through acquisition as well. And so there's a lot that can be based on the ROI driven by a great culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you point out rightly in your book, the customer loyalty is also tied to the stability that you can create
Oh,
with
yeah.
your staff, and the culture that you create with your staff. The clients will see that, and they will enjoy being part of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Very much
actually,
so.
yeah, will affect your profits and your revenue and that, and the loyalty, the actual loyalty of the clients in that way.
Yeah. Often, especially in a professional service firm, you've got
Hmm.
a client who has a couple layers of hierarchy in their own company who relate to the couple layers of hierarchy in the professional service firm. So they're dealing with each other on multiple levels. And then you got a key person at the customer service firm who leaves, and then that interaction and that relationship is interrupted, number one. And perhaps the client decides to go with um, follow the person who's leaving. And so that's another disruption. And better off to have happy employees and happy clients who all work together over many, many years. There's so much less learning curve. I mean, it's harder to get new clients than it is to keep clients.
Hmm.
About
Yeah.
6 times harder, I think, is some of the stats I've read about that. So it's important to um, the culture is such a big aspect of just making everything work really well.
Hmm.
I mean, who wants to come to work when there's friction all the time? This one's leaving, that one's upset. We have a client issue here, we have an employee issue there. Um, and it's hard to get work done, and this department's not talking to that department. Who wants any of that? No CEO I've ever talked to wants that.
That's the logical side. So now we
Yeah.
have both the formulas and the logic, the intuitive part. It's very clear. Do the culture work. You'll be happy you did.
Yep. That's door one and door two, right?
There it is. Thank you, Jerry, so much. What a wonderful conversation. Thanks for your time and for your insights here today.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed it too. You asked some really great questions, and it's a fascinating subject and something that I really felt passionate about, as we talked about before. And I hope that all the people who are listening really pick up on this and say, I have to look at whether my culture is toxic or not. I've got to care about more about my employees. I've got to look at my leadership and up the game so that I can realize all these benefits, right? And it's it's um it's the best way to be in business,
Yeah, and keep doing it. It's not
right?
a once and done.
And sometimes you have failing, or like lawyers and accountants who are working with a lot of other businesses, and they see those businesses failing and they say, what can I do to help those? I'm just reporting numbers, I'm just handling legal issues. But, this becomes have you ever thought about your culture, and maybe if you did something about that, some of these issues would go away?
Yeah.
That's why they can really help their clients too.
Yeah, especially if you've done it and you've experienced it from the
Yeah.
inside. What does this
Yeah.
work do?
And you know what? Somebody who's really good at handling and designing their culture has very little need for an employment attorney.
Mm.
So you really cut down on some of those legal bills.
There's another ROI for you.
That's right. Another ROI.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jerry. This has
You're
been
welcome.
a great chat. And to our listeners, if you are interested in learning more about Jeri Quinn, please go to drivingimprovedresults.com. You've been listening to Get in the Driver's Seat, stories about leadership moments in small to mid-sized professional practices. I'm your host, Sandra Beckor, Practice Management Coach at Beckor Management. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.